Okay, so we've jumped into race 2 of round 2 of this season's ERL. This was a points race on the turf and surf route in Mercury Islands. It really wasn't a straightforward route. We were having a chat in our Discord beforehand, and this seems to be an ongoing theme of this season's and last season's ERL, that these sprinter points races are not quite as straightforward and potentially not as sprinter orientated as they have been in previous years. In previous years, it was quite common for there to be at least one of the races in the round to be a real dedicated sprinting race, where there may be 6 to 10 intermediate sprint points on truly flat courses. That hasn't been the case over more recent times. Like I say, even the actual sprint races, the points races, which this is in theory, are not quite as straightforward as what they have been. There were 2 sprint points, 2 opportunities to pick up some intermediate points on this race. The first of which comes really early on, just a kilometre into the race after the banner drops, and we were discussing how basically we didn't know how it was going to go. Were teams going to go full on as soon as the banner drops to try and create some sort of gap? Was it going to be quite easy until the actual sprint point, or was it going to be extremely hard straight out of the gate? So we had a bit of a discussion about whether we wanted any riders to kind of go hard early. For myself, I tend to fare a little bit better on slightly longer sprints rather than ones that require a really high sort of peak power. So my sort of thought process was to try and sit in for a lot longer, try and sit in the bulk of the pack, and then come through with a slightly later sprint. And when we exited the pens, there were a few orange numbers initially, but riders did sort of fairly quickly back off to a hard, but not crazy, insane pace. I did see an orange number flash up on the rider list there, and I did think, oh, is this going to start? So I was just trying to keep myself. It's a relatively small field for a ZRL. It's only 53. I think that a lot of riders have perhaps dropped out of doing a lot of the ZRL racing. The numbers in the races are lower than they were traditionally. But I just try to keep myself kind of mid-pack, and we go across the start line of the alley sprint here at 700 metres. I just thought I'd try and stay seated for a little while and then started kicking on. The sprint segment is nearly 500 metres long, so it was important not to go crazy early, and I just tried to stay within the sort of the main draft of the pack, and then came through just about with a late surge to come across the line in first, which was great, really. The fastest through points are not as important now as what they used to be. Traditionally in ZRL, fastest through was more heavily weighted. Over recent times, so this year, the 24-25 season, the fastest through points don't have a great deal of weighting. In fact, they only go 5 deep, and there's only 10 for first place. Whereas for first across the line, which I was there in that sprint, I came across the line in first place, there's 20 points. For the first fastest through, there's only 10, and like I say, they only go 5 deep, whereas the first across the line points now go 20 deep. So it's more important to actually target those than just purely the fastest through time, which of course takes a slightly different technique and tactic. If you're going for fastest through, you tend to sprint from the back of the pack. If you're going for first across the line, you need to kind of be more aware of that, of your position when you're taking on the sprint. So I managed first in first across the line, and I actually took third just as a byproduct of that, in fastest through. So I was quite happy with my initial points haul from the first sprint. We now had around 12 kilometres of basically flat and slightly downhill before we got down to the next key point, which was the climb heading into the Shisha sprint. Okay, so we've dropped forward to kilometre 11.8, and it's definitely been true to say that the riders have not particularly gone easy. At this point, we're still a few K off from the climb and the next sprint. And like I actually said to some of my teammates here on Discord, I was saying that I was doing at times nearly 500 watts there and not really moving forward in this pack. That pack, you can see in the mini map, is really strung out. And yeah, they were pushing a crazy pace. And I have to be honest, I was feeling a little bit apprehensive of even being able to survive this little attack here. I was trying to save as much energy as I could because I knew that the next sprint segment, I mean, that's what I tend to fare slightly better on is sprint segments. But the next one was quite hard to call how it was going to play out. Luckily for us, we had Yves, one of our teammates, who was feeling a little bit unwell, but he dropped in to sort of watch the race, and he was on Discord with us, and it was really helpful during today's race, because during things like attacks like that, there were a number of other similar sort of attacks over that, between the finish of the first sprint and where we are now, and he would drop on to just view other riders at the front of the group, to see what kind of power output they were doing and how the attacks were going. And he was relaying that information to us over Discord. So we knew, for example, a good maybe 10, 15 seconds before it was clear to see that the group was slowing down and reforming, we knew prior to that he'd be saying that, the riders at the front are now only doing sort of 4.8 to 5 watts a kilo, so you could sit in the group with obviously a lot lower power. So we knew that it was possible for us to actually back off. Even though the group looked really sort of stretched, we knew that we could begin thinking about backing off, because with him viewing the front riders, we knew that the group was going to come back together. Again, something we discussed before the start is we did not know how this sprint was going to play out. So the Shisha sprint comes at the top of about 2 kilometres of climbing road. And literally at the top of the climb pretty much is where the sprint is. Now, that's what I'm saying about the fact that these kind of points or sprint races are not as straightforward as what they were, because that of course gave opportunities for those riders who've got better sustained power to actually kind of kick on hard on the climb and potentially drop or really sort of put into difficulty those riders who've kind of are more better suited towards your traditional sprint. So for myself, I really wasn't sure how this was going to play out. Generally speaking, I haven't got a particularly strong sustained power, or relatively speaking, it's a bit of a weakness. And this is a really strong division. This is an A1 division, so it contains a lot of riders who've got extremely good sustained power. So basically my plan was to try and sit towards the front of the pack. It isn't the steepest climb, but any time that there is a climb on Zwift, the pack always goes hard. So I was just planning on sitting that kind of top 10 to top 15 spots to have plenty of draft, but also be close enough to the front to try and kind of follow what was happening rather than be on the tail of it and trying to catch up. At this point, I knew that there was still well over a kilometre to go until the first sprint, and I was going backwards. I was definitely concerned that I was not going to survive the climb. My heart rate's up there, 189. The power is, what am I at? I'm at sort of well over 6 watts per kilo, which would be sort of 450 to 500 watts. We were just sustaining that, and then kind of almost expecting to sprint over the top of it, which I didn't know if I was going to be able to do. There was a slight lulling of the pace there, which gave me a good opportunity. And just here the gradient drops slightly flatter, but I keep on the power because I thought this is a key segment. It's got a key point where the group seemed to slow off, even though I was sitting towards the back. When that gradient dropped, I give it a little kick just for a few pedal strokes, and I've managed to, instead of being sort of beginning to become gap towards the back, I've actually sort of come through the pack a little bit. So we were now on to the sort of the latter, slightly steeper bit of this climb. So I had to fare the power up. I don't know if there was an error there. I was under the understanding they would only be aero helmets that we'd be getting. So I thought I'd use this towards the end of the climb. There's a little bit of orange numbers in the climb here, is in gradient. And the actual sprint starts at 16.3. I was really struggling here, I have to be honest. I didn't think I was going to be able to feature. I'm quite far back, but I've just started kicking on here. And this is not exactly what you can deem to be a sprint or sprint power. It's very, very blunted. Very blunted. But then everybody's is. But yeah, I really struggled to kind of put out any sort of decent sprint power following that 2.5 to 3 minute effort. I did manage. I actually think I probably could have done with kicking on slightly earlier. I came through on the rider list there. It sort of looked like I was maybe 6th or 7th, but when I actually seen the results, I was 10th across the line, which is halfway in the points. So that's better than I was expecting. And again, like the first sprint, I actually took 3rd across the line. So that picked me up some decent points, which following the sprint actually happening, I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to feature there. After that, with the sprint coming at the end of the climb, it was definitely going to suit sort of riders that had a slightly better sustained power. So to have actually picked up points there, whilst feeling, in all honesty, not feeling great up that climb, I was quite happy with that. So those 2 segments picked up a nice little haul of points. Phil, one of my teammates, he got 2nd as well on the sprint there. So picked up some brilliant points on that segment. So we were in quite a strong position actually. We picked up a number of points across both segments, but again, what was coming before the finish line was not straightforward and not what we've traditionally seen in these sprinter points races. So we'll drop forward to that and see how that played out now. So there was a short descent off the climb, which was really, really needed. But a group of riders have decided to go quite hard just on this flat section. It was one of the same riders from earlier on who was putting in some attacks. And the group was, again, really, really strong. And I'm starting to become a little bit concerned that I'm going to get dropped here. I've had this sort of a slight ongoing issue with my hamstring, which seems to have it's been sort of laying dormant for probably 18 months, particularly over the top of this little bit of a climb here. I was going backwards, and I was going backwards fast. And it almost feels like as if my hamstring's cramping up sometimes when I've gone hard a number of times. It isn't cramp because there's plenty of electrolytes going in. It's not a particularly long event. I think it's come from a sort of historic tear, slight tear that just is kind of playing up. So it's something I've had to have sort of looked at recently. Hopefully it won't be long and it'll be on the mend, but sometimes, and it's not all the time, but sometimes in a race, when I've gone hard on multiple occasions, it flares up, and it's really, really limiting, because the actual, even though the effort was a bit harder here, it would have been manageable. But what it actually is it's not so much the effort that makes me drop, it's the fact that I get to the point where I actually kind of can't pedal. So I was a bit concerned that that was going to happen there. Luckily it eased up. I just sort of stretch out the hamstring there a little bit to try and get it to ease. We now had about a kilometre until the start of the climb out of here, back up to the kind of the Neokio area. That again, we didn't know how it was going to play out. We talked about it in Discord beforehand. We didn't know how the field was going to take the climb. So we'll drop forward to there and just have a quick look. Okay, so we're on to the climb here. We're about 500 metres into it. It's slightly stepped. It lasts for kind of, I think it's about 2.1k before we actually get to the flat run in to the finish line. And yeah, my sort of fears were being realised a little bit. That hamstring was starting to play up. So it was always going to be a hard effort to actually to hold on to this group here when riders kind of went hard up the climb. But again, like I say, Yves was monitoring the front of the group and relaying to us what was happening. And yeah, it wasn't going overly hard. It was going at a pace that should have been manageable for me. But yeah, like I say, I could feel that sort of hamstring sort of starting to play up. So when it was when the group was actually easing off the power, I had to kind of really back off and try and stretch it out. And then, yeah, just as we kind of go along this flatter section, and when it kicks off again, it goes a little bit harder on the steeper bit. I'm unable to kind of pedal properly, with the power that I'd want to. And I just start seeing that group just pulling away from me, which is quite frustrating. Because, like I say, it was quite a flat finish. So it should have been one that would have really quite suited me quite well. And yeah, like it's now, I just cannot. You see, my power is just dropping and dropping. I just can't quite get it round. Bit annoying, like I say, it's kind of laid dormant a little bit for a while. And I managed to fall over a couple of weeks back, so I don't know whether it's kind of that's kicked it off a little bit. But luckily for me, I just kind of roll into the finish line down in about 40th position. But yeah, managed to get some good early points, so it wasn't a wasted effort, it wasn't a wasted night out, but it would have been nice to have been there and featured a little bit heavier, or more towards the pointy end at the finish. We did manage to finish in 5th overall, which is pretty much smack bang down the middle of our division. We did alright in the points segments. We were a little bit behind really with finishing points. We had, not necessarily the best sort of finishing positions kind of at the end of the sprint, which just kind of cost us a slightly better overall finish.